Welcome everybody, my name's Delton Chen, I'm the founder of the Global Carbon Reward, and we're here today with Sven von Vittorelli, or Dr. Vittorelli, who's a consultant in the ecological sciences, conservation biologist or ecologist. And the reason we're here today is just to talk about the policy, the carbon reward policy, and to get Sven's opinion on the policy, what he likes, what he doesn't like, and to bring out some topics of discussion, particularly in relation to ecosystems. So, would you like to introduce yourself, Sven?
Gladly. Hi, everybody. As Delton mentioned, my name is Sven von Vittorelli. I am leading the biodiversity work for a large Scandinavian design and engineering consultancy. And I'm also holding a few other roles within environmental organizations around the world, and I'm also a contributing author to the IPBES global assessment, which is basically the biodiversity equivalent to the IPCC report. And so I'm also a science fiction author and lover, which is also coincidentally how I got in touch with Delton, because I've been a huge admirer of a novel called The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. And a key element and core element in this story has, of course, been built on the works of Delton Chen, which I found highly intriguing, and which was then also the reason why I decided to get in touch with you.
Great, and we're actually in Berlin right now. I've come to Germany originally to speak at Hanover at the Nord LB conference, and then it was a great opportunity to come to Berlin to meet you and other people here. And I'm really excited actually to be here so we can have a conversation around the policy and to get your views on how you think the policy might work or might not work in relation to both climate and ecosystem protection. So to get started, would you like to comment on what you like about the policy? Perhaps in relation to the root cause of the problem, financially or otherwise?
Yeah, gladly. This is actually where to even start. So I think what I really like about Delton's policy, that it is, from my perspective, really, and I've read a lot of stuff, both in climate and biodiversity policy, and from my perspective, even though it is just a theory yet that still needs to be proven, I think this is the first viable approach to addressing the actual root cause of our of the climate change equation that humanity has been writing for itself. What do I mean by that? If we look at the current policy landscape and the current toolbox with which we try to address the climate crisis and also the financing problem, we have a lot of tools in there. We have a lot of technologies developed. We have a lot of frameworks developed. We have a lot of incentives created for companies on how to act on climate change. We have the ongoing IPCC, the ongoing UN AFRY process going on, the climate change conferences, the COPs. There's a lot happening, and yet we are still having the issue that the trajectory of change towards a greener, more sustainable, net zero, nature positive environment or society is too flat to achieve any of the targets that we have set in any of the frameworks on time. And I know this is an unpopular opinion, but we need to accept the fact that within our current toolbox, we have not a single viable mechanism that would allow us to achieve the Paris targets or the Montreal-Kunming-Montreal targets. So we can look at everything that is on the map, and eventually when we run the numbers and look at it in more detail, we find issues such as upscaling issues in technology. We find issues such as political gridlocks. We find issues such as even societal responses, strong societal responses to certain initiatives towards initiating climate-friendly technologies in private life or wherever. And where does this all come from? It comes from the root cause that we have currently found no solution to the capital reallocation problem. That's how I think we discussed it before, and I think this is how we call it. So we have a capital reallocation problem to finance climate change and biodiversity issues. So this is the absolute root cause that actually prevents us from moving forward. And also to add a bit more detail on that, because I think this is important to understand this root cause. Every solution that we have come up with so far requires huge investments, either from the private sector or via subsidies from governments or from other sources. And these investment requirements are so huge that we are unable to do them, basically. So, and this is also why we have political pushback, we have societal pushback, we have pushback from the private sector, because if we ask people to do too much of investment right now in the current paradigm, it might actually steepen the curve a bit to get us closer to the targets, but it's also a huge social risk and a huge economic risk, and not even an economic risk, but there might be the certainty of basically damaging our economy severely, thereby creating a counter effect of getting us even further away from the Paris targets. So this is the paradox that we are in right now. We have the capital reallocation problem, and we just haven't found a solution to break through this capital reallocation problem, because all the current solutions are being based on the requirements for making these type of investments, which are infeasible to basically help us achieve the Paris targets. And I believe that the policy that Delton has developed is actually the first viable solution to actually address the root cause. And we really need to address the root cause to make all these other technologies, the other frameworks, all this immense effort that was actually, which is still super important, and to make this also viable and help us move forward.
So perhaps we could summarize by saying the strength of the carbon reward policy is the ability to provide mitigation finance at speed and scale.
Yes.
To be commensurate with the problem in terms of the gigatons of carbon to be avoided or removed. So if we assume that part of the policy is reliable and plausible, what's your view on the policies from the perspective of an ecologist? So on one hand, to protect the environment, to stabilise the climate and protect the planetary biosphere, we do need to deal with the quantity of carbon, that gigatons to be avoided and removed from the atmosphere. So that's kind of part and parcel of the problem. But do you see this policy as having maybe a weakness or a strength in regards to ecosystems? Do you have an opinion there?
Yeah, so the way I have looked at the policy and the way I have experienced both the climate and the biodiversity discussions, I think there are huge opportunities also for the term or for the aspect of biodiversity for biodiversity concerns. There are just a few issues that we need to be aware of, which are also already causing some issues and between both initiatives for climate and biodiversity. So just taking a look at the policy, again, since this is one that would help us address the root cause and help us to achieve the capital reallocation required to do this transition on time, a lot of the technologies and changes and adjustments within our economies and in our systems would be able to create strong synergies, I think, between climate protection and biodiversity protection. This is some of the aspects are like more efficient technologies for pollution reduction, circular economy, overall more effective use of land and resources, and as well as some direct mechanisms that you propose in your policy to address, like making these virtuous investments in certain ecosystem restoration measures to create these synergies. So I think from that perspective, there would be like strong potential to both accelerate both campaigns. One thing that we need to be aware of course, are the potential conflicts of goals in between these two in between these two initiatives, right? And those are potential conflicts and risks that we already see today. So one example, is the expansion of wind infrastructure versus bird mortality. We unfortunately have the issue in Germany that usually the more threatened and larger birds are more volatile or more vulnerable to wind farm mortality than other species. Just to give an example. There are other examples for other technologies. For instance, expansion of solar tower requires to take us a lot of land, which could otherwise be used for ecosystem restoration. So there might be these goal conflicts that might increase when we start accelerating the transition due to these new type of funding mechanisms that may become viable with this policy that you propose.
Yeah, so this problem is a trade-off problem. If we roll out a lot of renewables, there will inevitably be environmental impacts. When you erect wind turbines, it could be bird mortality, or if you roll out solar plants, it could be turtle mortality in a desert, for example, like in California. But to deal with this, the policy has to be generic, and it has to be flexible and adaptive to accommodate all kinds of problems. So the policy, what it's offering is the notion of reward adjustments, adjusting the rewards, they're debt-free conditional grants, to incentivize the ecological protection and co-benefits that we might want. And the way it would be managed is through stakeholder groups. So there'll be a stakeholder group specifically representing ecologists, biologists and land carers, and they would set the agenda or the criteria for point scoring these projects. Does that sound like a reasonable approach, or would you prefer to see something different? You know, because the way Channel 3 works, the reward adjustments, it's quite organic. It's saying the policymaker can't set the agenda. Let's do a bottom-up approach for Channel 3 reward adjustments and let stakeholders decide on how to point score projects. Does that feel intuitively or scientifically, does it feel right to you?
Yeah, I think it could work. I mean, the good thing is that we are already aware of these issues. One challenge that we may, as I mentioned, that we may encounter is that the transition may accelerate at speed, which would also exponentially increase these conflicts when it comes to the implementation of projects. So we just really need to be sure and be aware of that we have like a cushion to basically to catch this increased number of projects that might create conflicts. So yeah,
a cushion, like you mean some sort of way to prevent getting out of control.
Yeah, exactly. So we just need to be aware that we need to have sufficient infrastructure and resources in place to be able to deal with this increased number of climate versus biodiversity conflicts, to solve and manage these risks accordingly.
Okay, well maybe we should move on to talk about the policy in terms of maybe other possible problems or issues it hasn't addressed. Do you have any concerns maybe that we didn't write about in the policy working paper? I just don't want to, assume that the policy is perfect. Perhaps there's something in the policy might be weak or missing. Have you come to any conclusions there?
Yeah, so it's really an interesting. I'm also very interested in science communication, and your policy is also a very interesting challenge in terms of communication and getting the word out to thought leaders and policymakers, because we are stuck in such a doomsday scenario and in such desperation. A lot of people are that sometimes we dismiss a potential solution or potential idea as too good to be true before taking a closer look at it. And unfortunately, this is the case with this policy, because this, like everybody who has taken a closer look at it, including the whole reward mechanism, I think the vast majority of these people that I have been forwarding the policy to, they came out of it and they say, like, oh my God, this makes sense. Like they really had this fundamental, shocking expression in their faces, who were like, I think I am aware of what I just read, and I think this could work. And just like understanding the gravity of this statement and of this experience and this hope this is suddenly generating. However, to get there, you unfortunately have to go through the policy paper. And a lot of people, even when they look at it first, they dismiss this policy based on certain issues that they might face, that they see. One that, when I showed this to people, thing that people encounter a lot is the risk of inflation. So as you might know, the reward mechanism that Delton proposes includes a central bank-backed currency which defends a certain floor price for the reward channels. And which means that through some form of quantitative easing, sometimes the central banks are supposed to step in to defend the floor price in case this reward, in case the reward price on the open market starts to drop down. And of course, this is a potential risk of inflation. And I think this is what a lot of people stumble across when they look at it from an economic perspective. And maybe you can shed some more light on it, on actually how, maybe also like discuss like how much of a funding gap is this to close at all, and then how big this funding gap that it is supposed to close is actually when you compare it to like the overarching economy that is supposed to defend the floor price. Yeah, just like.
So the risk of inflation is probably one of the more controversial aspects of the policy, but fundamentally, just reiterating, reflecting what you're saying, it appears that the central bank guarantee, the price floor for the tradable carbon asset, the carbon currency, is a good idea, because it's what drives the policy economically, the macro financial strength of the policy to be able to fund to the level of trillions of dollars. So, of course, monetary inflation becomes a big question, and we could do back-of-the-envelope calculations, but I think at this stage, I would say that we really need to maybe hire an economist to do some analytical work on the inflation effects or preliminary modelling. I'd rather not make any statements myself. So it's a bit of an unknown, actually. I can't give you numbers, but I think if we think in terms of what we're avoiding, that's the climate inflation. There are recent studies saying that we've already lost maybe 12 or 18% of GDP due to climate change in the last 20 or 30 years.
Global GDP.
Yeah. And some people estimate the social cost of carbon being as high as $1,000 a tonne. Now, if these estimates are approximately right, I don't know if they're right, but if they are approximately right, it kind of indicates that future economic loss will be very significant. And so beyond those marginal losses of productivity are the climate tipping elements. And so it's not really just about economic loss that we can predict, it's the catastrophic damages that we can't predict that are probably even a bigger problem. So the climate tipping elements, such as the Amazon dieback or the permafrost thaw or the AMOC destabilizing, these would be absolutely terrible. And so maybe this problem of climate change is much more dynamic than what economists originally assumed. And so we can't necessarily work purely on a cost versus benefit model, and we need to go to this preventative approach, risk management approach. So there's some room for manoeuvre there when talking about inflation to avoid that climate inflation.
Perhaps it's also worth pointing out that this is not like the the ultimate super weapon. This is like this policy is designed to close what you say like around half of the annual funding gap.
I think so, because with the conditional grant, projects will also borrow money from banks and attract equity investment. So the ratio could be, double the amount that we offer in terms of other finance.
Yeah, which also indicates that there's a limit to how far the central banks would need to step in, because this is like not a barrel without bottom when it comes to climate finance. So there will be limitations.
Yes. So just to point out, so the viewers are really clear, the tradable carbon asset or the carbon currency is going to be used to reallocate financial capital in open markets, so the central banks don't have to fund the whole thing. That's a key point. So how about we move on to circular economy, because that came up recently in discussions, our discussions. Do you have a view on the circular economy, comparing that idea to carbon reward? Do you see similarities and differences?
Well, the issue with circular economy, again, is, from my perspective, with all the greatest respect to the people who have been working on this for years, because the theoretical and practical foundations that are already being applied, they're invaluable in moving forward. But again, circular economy does not address the root cause. The root cause is the capital reallocation problem, and circular economy also requires us to make investments. And in very rare cases, the companies are able to measure the return on these investments on a scale that they are able to assess and evaluate in their business plans, which again, from my perspective, says like, okay, circular economy is not the ultimate solution. It will not help us in significantly progressing towards a more sustainable society, at least not at this speed that we need. It is invaluable to help us get there, because we need the technologies, we need the ideas, and we need the approaches. But we also need the funding to implement them.
So you think the circular economy is focused too much on recycling materials and not enough on looking at the financial problem. Is that the key point you're making?
Yes. So the key point is making it is focusing on certain technological and infrastructural solutions. Please don't quote me too much here, because I'm not the circular economy expert. But the way I have experienced this subject, it's the same with biodiversity solutions that we are working on right now. Biodiversity technologies for surveys, etc. They're invaluable to help us assess land. But at the end of the day, even what I'm doing does not address the root cause of the climate finance problem that we are facing. But I also want to emphasize that circular economy, again, is an incredibly important cornerstone of the sustainable transition. I just wanted to highlight, and that is something we need to accept, the circular transition that we are doing today is not fast enough because it's too expensive. And even if we wait for technological innovation, these technological innovations will likely come too late to help us steepen the curve without a new policy. So this is, again, the point that I want to emphasize, that we need to steepen the curve. We will get there eventually with all the technologies and frameworks that we have put in place right now and all the concepts. But it would be far later than the time that we have still left to basically address any of the Paris targets on time.
Right. I think I'd like to add that the circular economy model is structured around stocks and flows. That's the key concept, in my opinion, how matter flows into the system, comes out, some is recycled and some is waste. And the key difference between global carbon reward is that its stock and flow model is structured with two systems. The sectors of the economy that produce goods and services, and a new mitigation sector that we'll create with the carbon currency that's specialised to mitigation. So it's breaking down, it's dividing human civilization into two sectors which are specialised according to the way they metabolise carbon. And that's a very sophisticated concept, but that's where it differs in terms of the theory on stocks and flows. So maybe that's an idea that people watching might like to look into.
Yeah, thanks for adding that.
Can we fix all of our problems with a carbon reward or a reward of some kind? What do you think?
Yeah, actually, that was the question that I wanted to ask you.
You wanted to ask me that question?
Yeah, I was actually wanted to ask you.
Well, that's on our list of points, so
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can ask me the question. Maybe I should ask myself. Or,
Yeah, no, I think that what I've been reflecting on is like that if this works, then there would be the question, if your reward scheme works and we really effectively address climate change, then there will be eventually the question, why do we not invent a currency for all the problems that we are facing in terms of pollution, in terms of social issues, social justice, north-south, global north versus global south, wealth distribution, with this kind of a reward scheme? Why don't we have a currency for everything afterwards?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or should we?
My short answer is no. I have a framework for understanding the carbon reward, and it's linked to the carbon cycle and the systemic risks of the carbon cycle, and the way I've linked that to market economics, neoclassical theory. So my theoretical framework, this approach, the carbon reward, the central bank guarantee, and the carbon currency, is only supposed to be used when we have these kinds of systemic risks in a Earth system. And so I think it's most likely going to be applied to carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And nitrogen and phosphorus are actually two other planetary boundaries. We've got climate, which is to do with carbon, and then we've got nitrogen and phosphorus. So that's where I think it goes, and I don't think it can be used necessarily for universal basic income or a wide variety of things. This is quite advanced thinking, it's extrapolating. I also think this work might end up showing us that we can't necessarily recycle certain kinds of material, and plastics probably fall into that group because recycling as a concept tends to focus our attention on just taking the plastic rubbish, putting it in a recycling bin, and forgetting it. But in reality, the ability to recycle any material has a lot to do with its molecular structure. And plastics don't biodegrade or easily. And so we're caught in this dependency on plastic, which I don't think is sustainable.
I think what you said at the beginning was really important, that your policy, just also to help the reader or listener understand that there's really some merit behind this policy, is that you have actually a very sophisticated economic and economic model and resource. How do you say that in English? Not a resource flow model. Stock and flow model behind this policy to basically back up the claims and the solutions that you have put in place. So there really is a very sophisticated theory behind it.
I think we should probably wrap up soon. Maybe there's a couple more points. Would you like any more points you'd like to cover? The paying out fossil fuel companies. Do you think that could be a problem for some people in terms of the morality or ethics behind buying out fossil fuel companies to substitute that with renewables?
I think so. I mean, there are obviously already a lot of pressures, particularly in the global south and in the biodiversity-rich areas where fossil fuel companies go into areas that are incredibly rich in biodiversity value or even indigenous territories. So such a mechanism could help ease the burden and ease these conflicts. But on the other hand, of course, there will be the moral question, why should we give even more money to the companies who created the problem in the first place? But I wouldn't actually, this is actually one of the key themes, key issues when you are dealing with the private sector as a conservation biologist, because the private sector is not an enemy. It's it's just an entity that is working with a specific rule set, and unfortunately, this rule set that we are all bound by is based on the assumption of infinite growth in a finite world. And unfortunately, at some point, all of us, even the NGOs, are bound to these processes. It's just far more obvious in the private sector because they're working with numbers and they're working on growth opportunities and risk management. So While I see that this might be seen as a moral issue for I would even say a lot of people, I unfortunately would also conclude that we don't actually have any other choice, because again, these are large companies, and with hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people and employees behind it, and somehow these large entities need to economically survive, because if these companies do not survive, this would also at some point cause severe economic problems for the corresponding countries, which again would cause social resistance to the climate issues at a scale as we have experienced in Germany recently. So yeah, I think we just have to, just have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So I think maybe there's a moral argument
Yeah.
to actually buy out the fossil fuel companies,
Mhm.
because the alternative is much worse. I think, in terms of risk, systemic risk.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about or critique before we end today?
No, I think good.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks, Sven, for your time, and I hope everybody listening gains some insights from this discussion, and thanks for your time, Sven. It's been great collaborating.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really good to meet you.
Cheers.